Dear colleagues, let's start the next briefing on the presentation on the result of National Survey on Equality between Men and Women in Ukraine. Ivanna Klimpush-Tsintsadze is present, the and Mary Higgin, their head of NDI Ukraine. Ms. Ivanna, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to have this chance today to present the first Ukraine National Survey on Equality between Men and Women, which was organized by NDI. And it was done on my request and in cooperation with the Office on the Vice Prime Minister on Euro-Atlantic integration. And I'm sure that the representation of this survey will support on breaking those myths which are incessantly imposed on us and certain politicians or populists, because they try to convince us that the role of a woman in Ukrainian society should not be equal with the role of men, and the place of a woman is in archaic past. But in reality, in sociology and our citizens say completely opposite. And I would like to emphasize as well that even though that, despite all the efforts to take us back to Russian world and war and all the aggression that we need to fight for the past 4 years, more than 4 years, and next brutal provocation, which were organized this Sunday, our society is growing up, becoming more modern, and really is defining our main values and directions, and having consolidation of the efforts and emotions which we had in Maidan in 2014. In our society, we can state that we have had some drastic changes, and they indicate that we have different attitudes towards gender equality, equality between men and women, and it is indicator of the level of democracy in society, the maturity of society, and the possible indicator that we understand the added value of engagement of women in economic development. I will move to the presentation in particular. I'm really grateful to Ms. Mary that NDI gave me this chance to present the part of this research, which I believe is extremely important for our understanding of the current situation. First of all, the first question was how important for you that Ukraine become the full functioning democracy. And I'm very happy about the fact that in all regions of Ukraine, vast majority state that it is important to them or extremely important to them. And the average percentage says 81%. So 81% of citizens say that for them it is important for Ukraine to become full functioning democracy. And this proves the fact that we are getting to the level of maturity to understand that democratic society is a principal matter for us, and those countries which are democratic and which have selected gender equality as an important principle, they are leading on the world ratings on economic development and democratic development, and index of happiness, as so-called. Which means that we as society, we are mature enough for these changes, and we are ready to accept it, and we support our choice which we made in 2014. Next slide, please. This slide, as for me, has the the real answer to all those who want to take us back to the past. And it completely breaks the myth that society is not ready for equality between men and women. And the myth that as if our citizens see some threat about threat of gender equality to family or traditional values, because the question how important the equality between men and women are for you, 81% of women and 73% of men they stated this problem as important or very important. And it's very important for me to see that this question is important not only for women, but for majority of men as well. And it seems to me that we passed this irreversible point. And in our society, we accepted that gender equality, it is a base for existence of society, and we have a huge potential. And I'm very happy that the government responds to this demand. We are proactive because this year we were forming these priorities previous year, but this year in the priority points of the activity of government, some of the priorities were about implementation of gender equality. And we are successfully implementing them, and it was done for the first time in Ukrainian history in any activity of any government. And we adopted the state program on providing equal opportunities for men and women, and we also renewed the national plan according to the plan 1325. And for the first time, we accepted the national plan on 2021 on implementation recommendation of CEDAW. And moreover, on the last hearing of the government, we also fulfilled one of our priorities. We made a decision on having the bi-central executive institutions about gender legal expertise analysis, and we developed the rules and renewed the approach, and starting from the 1st of December it has to come into action. Also, the issue of gender equality is as priority action for our annual program on the Commission Ukraine-NATO. And this is a separate task for our security and defense institutions and agencies. Next slide, please. Respondents were asked to say one word or phrase which they associate with equality between men and women. And you can see, if we look at this cloud, you can see that equality, equal attitudes, everybody's equal, justice or fairness, these are the key answers in the understanding of people and perception of people of what they associate equality between men and women with. And again, equality between men and women means the exercising of fundamental human rights, justice and objectivity. And in this sense, we as Ukrainians, we are moving in the world trends. And you know about the big number of different campaigns which have happened over the past years in the world for fighting for various rights for women, about salary gap and equal representation. And we are moving in the same direction as well as other democratic countries. Next slide, please. So here we have two clouds which demonstrate the answers of men and women. So how men and women feel stressed based on the roles that they need to fulfill in their lives. Women who participated, they needed to name the challenges that men don't understand and they don't know about, what challenges women face, and men who participated in the research, they needed to name the challenges that women don't understand. And we can see that women believe that men don't understand the challenges connected with household duties, about challenges with taking care of children and bringing children. And unfortunately, woman still has to run the same distance, but with extra weight put on her legs. And this extra weight burden, that would be the emotional caring about the members of the family, household, health services for children, upbringing, and of course to achieve those very high standards about the society has about what women should look like, and the stereotypes about their behavior. About men, we can see that men believe that women don't understand the challenges which about as they are breadwinners of the family, and the challenges which are connected with the work problems. Even though that financial support of the dependent members of the family, this is a challenge for men and women, but we can see that it's a bigger challenge for men. Also, we can state that discrimination, women see discrimination as a challenge, but gender stereotypes, as we can see it as a challenge on both sides. So these stereotypes, they are a challenge as for men and women. And this process of breaking the stereotypes is extremely complicated. And even though we can state that after Revolution of Dignity we have a serious and drastic achievements when we see that we are getting rid of these colonial perceptions which were imposed by the Russian Federation here, and we are going back to freedom and equality, and Ukrainian society is becoming more modern and restoring the best models of gender equality, the best models from progressive countries. And one of the aspects that we pay attention to, that's the inclusion of women into economic development and using their full potential in professional activity. And in this case, as we are the country with 55% of women as the population of Ukraine, we still face discrimination in the difference in salary or career opportunities. But we need to remember that gender equality, this is a big resource for development of the country, and it has very clear aspects in economic category and in numbers. And this slide shows that 49% of Ukrainians, they believe that men and women should be equally involved in professional activities. So, in simple words, in the national economy, this additional resource, if it is used, the state can improve the economic engine and development. Of course, we haven't overcome all the gender equality issues, and every step is a difficult one, and we face very serious resistance on this way. Especially resistance from those people who try to take us back to the past. And one of these archaic aspect of society, and with the problem that is not really spoken about out loud, that's domestic violence. And unfortunately, in Ukraine, we have pretty impressive and horrifying numbers. And do you know anyone who became the victim of domestic violence? So the quarter of all population in Ukraine, they personally know the victim of domestic violence. That's 8.5 million of people in Ukraine, adult Ukrainians. They say that they know somebody who became the victim of domestic violence. Of course, a few people can know the same person. It doesn't mean that we have this number of victims of domestic violence, but the numbers are really high. And for this reason, we already make certain steps to fight this problem. And at the end of last year, Parliament adopted 2 laws on preventing of domestic violence and gender-based violence, and these are the laws which allow to create the tools to fight this terrible phenomenon. And at this moment, the Ministry of Social Policy and the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Healthcare, they are working on developing these tools to to use these laws. And this is an extremely important work which requires resources and funds and human resources, and understanding not only national level but on regional level the importance of this issue. We started to work with regions actively to provide them these tools and methodology how this problem of domestic violence can be solved in more efficient way. And of course now we haven't learned to use these legal achievements, and in reality we still need to do a lot for these laws to work effectively and efficiently. But it's also very important to have information, provide information, because 61% of respondents, they believe that victims need to report about cases like this, but the actual level of reporting is much lower. And the last slide from my part of the presentation. So that's probably the slide and this understanding which is important for us from the point of view that we are about to start political season, election season, on parliamentary elections, and not only presidential but parliamentary elections as well. And to the question, who in your opinion has to be more involved in political life? So 61% of Ukrainians, they say that they want to have more balanced representation of men and women in political life, which means that there is a demand for higher representation of women in government. And this is the conscious demand of society. And 66% all over the country, they know that men dominate now in political life of Ukraine, but only 36%, they believe that that's the way how it's supposed to be. So that's why I believe that at least formally nothing prevents women to go into politics, and many people use this, but like nobody stops them. They can go and they can fight for their right for political representation. But at the same time, I believe that it's more formal approach. But we need to move to real practical access for women to have access to government and politics, because this equality is beneficial for everyone, for society and state. If we have more women in top position in the country, so we will have more progressive decisions, which will include the interest of a lot bigger number of stakeholders in comparison to the situation when political life is dominated by men. But this low level of representation, which we still have, it doesn't reflect the capacity of women or their willingness to be involved in the political processes, because until now there is a very serious vertical disaggregation, gender disaggregation, which is realizing that usually men occupy top positions. And I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate 2 new female ministers, their appointment. And at this point, we have 4 members of government as women and 1 acting minister. So I was trying to calculate the percentage, and I got up to 18% of women in government. You know about the numbers of representation of women in parliament, that's 12%. Which is, So that's like the number of women in parliament, but when I meet with different audiences, when they don't know usually these numbers, and I ask them, so what do you think, like how many women are there in Ukrainian parliament? And usually I never hear lower than 30%. And I think that it shows that when women, they are trying to fulfill their duties, women, they are trying to have very high quality of work in parliament for those like who come after them, so to make it easier to be evaluated according to their professional activity and professional traits. But now women in parliament, they need to have 300% more, or I don't know even how many percent more than men who have the same positions. And of course, to summarize, I need to name my favorite quote of Ms. Thatcher, who said that any woman who can manage household can definitely manage the country. And I don't know, like if we have scientific data to prove this quote, but usually in our houses we have a lot more order than for now we have in the state. Thank you. So we're giving the floor to Ms. Mary O'Hagan.
Again, everybody, I just have a few additional slides to fill in some additional details for what the Vice Prime Minister so ably presented. She talked about support for Ukraine becoming a fully functioning democracy. And this slide shows you what are the characteristics of a fully functioning democracy in the eyes of the Ukrainian respondents. And it shows you in particular where the protection of human rights sits on that scale. The protection of human rights is number one of the characteristics of a fully functioning democracy in the eyes of these survey respondents from across Ukraine. I think in the current context that's especially important. And of course, equality between men and women is part of the protection of human rights. The next one, you've just been looking at political life. This is about family life. And you can see we've got the results of two questions on the same slide here. Blue is how people work, how people think things work today, and orange is how people think they should work. And you can see that when it comes to men and women equally participating in family life, 40% think that that's true today, but 71% think that that's how things should work. And that 71% is made up of 2/3 of men. 67% of Ukrainian men think that men and women should contribute equally in family life, and 75% of Ukrainian women think that men and women should contribute equally to family life. The next one is about how decisions are made within the household. The overarching demand that you saw for equality in the Vice Prime Minister's presentation rests in the way that people make decisions and lead their daily lives. This is not some rather strange, abstract question for people. It really relates to the way they make decisions every day. And here we've got some basic decisions: disciplining children, deciding on day-to-day expenses, making large investments like buying a car or a house, and then whether to have children or not. And the way we framed the question was to ask people, how did it work when you were growing up, and how does it work now? And what you can see is for each category of questions, larger numbers of people say that men and women in the family are making these decisions together than was the case when people were growing up. And it's true for every type of decision. And every type of decision, you can see that increase in equal decision making is statistically significant. The little bars you can see on these charts show you the margin of error. And where the change is larger than the margin of error, then you can say that the result is statistically significant. On the next one, this is very much like the slide that you saw about how important equality between men and women is to both men and women. This one is about the role of men in the upbringing of children. How important is that? On the left-hand side, 0, that means it's unimportant. On the right-hand side, 10 out of 10, that means it's super important. Any answer above 7 means it's important or very important for people. 73% of these respondents said it's important, or very important, that men are involved in the upbringing of children. And statistically, the results for male respondents and female respondents on this question was the same. It is, as the Vice Prime Minister said, a myth to imagine that equality only matters to women. It doesn't. It matters to society as a whole. And then the last slide I have for you, you've just seen some data about domestic violence. This is an equivalent question, which is about sexual harassment. And although the numbers of people who know a victim of sexual harassment is smaller, it's roughly half the number of those who know a victim of domestic violence, it still translates as 4.5 million Ukrainian adults know somebody who is a victim of sexual harassment. And just like domestic violence, you can see that these problems are underreported. There are many barriers to the victims of either domestic violence or sexual harassment reporting that something has happened. This is a global phenomenon. These barriers to reporting are similar in countries all over the world. Although, as with domestic violence, 2/3 say that the cases should be reported. And if the barriers to that reporting are better understood and addressed, as I'm sure the government is committed to doing, these numbers should eventually go down. Thank you very much. We're very happy to take your questions.
Надія Юрченко, Укрінформ. У мене запитання до пані віце-прем'єра. Ви вже згадали, цитату навели дуже таку цікаву, що жінка може, яка керує...
You have very interesting quote that like the woman who can manage household, like we had the woman who can manage the country. So we've never had a female president in Ukraine. So what do you think? Like, can a woman become president in Ukraine? And do you see there good candidates who already stated they wish to be president, or maybe they will say that they want to occupy this position? Thank you for your question. Look, I would like to congratulate Georgia on electing for the first time female president. It happened just yesterday. Yesterday, right? And they had a woman who was the Speaker of Parliament, if you remember. And this woman was acting president of Georgia during some period of transition after Rose Revolution. About whether society is ready, I think society is ready for this opportunity in Ukrainian dimension. But again, I would like to emphasize the following thing. I believe that in any case, there should be evaluation of a certain candidate according to his or her capability, traits, integrity, priorities, strategy, and so on and so forth. So I don't believe that we need to make our decision based whether it's a man or a woman who is running for a certain position, whether to be a president or any other elective position. And again, when appointing candidates, it's the same thing when it is some collegial institution. So we need to have equal representation, but again, based on professional selection. Because as there is negative, there is also positive discrimination, and we also need to take this into account. Whether if I see candidates, as how did you formulate this? Who already announced their candidacy or maybe will announce their candidacy? I'm not ready to vote for any women.
Maybe I can add one thing to this question, which is that NDI has tested whether voters in Ukraine take the gender of a candidate into account. This is particularly in the case of parliamentary elections, and we've tested it using a variety of methods. And actually, voters are equally willing to vote for male and female candidates. The gender of the candidate is not the thing that they're really interested in. They're much more interested in the things that the Vice Prime Minister was saying, what issues they're standing on, whether they are regarded as honest, and so on. So I think the barriers to women's political participation are not whether voters are willing to vote for them or not. The barriers, as in other countries, to women's political participation are around a whole range of other things. It's not the voters' fault that you only have 12% of women in parliament.
Якщо у когось ще є запитання?
Are there any more questions? Everything is clear. If there are no questions, so then everything is. We want to thank our speakers and to finish our briefing. We can provide you the handouts of presentations of this research. And I think that if you study this in detail, then you can learn a lot more information. And I hope that you as journalists will support our desire to inform society as much as possible. That what citizens really believe in, that's used as manipulation by many politicians, but this is their scientific research of what our citizens believe and what is important to them.